let's not mess about here because we've got plenty to get through. And the one thing story that comes out of every single weekend at the moment, no matter whether he starts the race or finishes the race or whatever, is Marc Marquez. So I figure we'll just start there because that's what everybody wants to talk about.
Yeah.
It's just all Marc all the time. So with him and Honda at the moment, how do you feel about this situation? Because obviously there's always going to be talk of him getting out of there because he needs to be on a championship winning bike and all that stuff. Otherwise, he can't do his thing. How hard do you think he pushes to get out now?
Well, you look at it, and the way I see it is it's going nowhere from how it's gone this season and over the the winter break from last year. He's still getting injured, still picking up injuries. What's he got now? Fractured rib. He's done something to his hand as well. I think, but then I was going to say I think he needs to push to get out. But then you look at what's available. Where's he going to go? We've discussed this in the other podcast that I do, and we've been saying really the only logical options to a Ducati, but then that's on a satellite Ducati at that point. And would Mark settle, if that makes sense, from dropping from the big boys that have been Repsol Honda for all these years down to a Grassini Ducati? Because VR46 aren't going to take him, and that's one of the only options he's got. So I'd say push and get out, but then you might have to take a sabbatical. So there's more questions than answers
Yeah,
really at the moment.
I think that's one of the ones that it probably hasn't been discussed very much is the sabbatical option, and that almost might be his best play, which is interesting. And also, I think it might be best for him because, like I said, he gets injured a lot. Maybe he just, I mean, he had the year off to recover when he was recovering. Imagine if he just had a year off to recover from nothing, right? Just don't get injured for another year, you know? Um, but it is a bit grim for them. And I'm the same as you, mate. I don't know where he goes. I do not know where he goes. I mentioned this in one of my videos after Sachsenring, I think. And since then, there's been a little bit of talk of maybe a third KTM team and things like that. Whether that's achievable or not, I don't know. Um, but other than that, my only other option that I could see, because he's not going to want to go to a similar situation at Yamaha, would be if Aprilia were able to move someone on and bring him in there as a factory ride and a bike that's rideable that, with his ability, he could probably push it to the front, even though they're just a little bit behind where they were last season at the moment. So that looked like the only thing for me. But then again, how much of a pay cut is he willing to take? Are they going to be able to pay him what Honda can afford to pay him? And then I start to think he may not be able to go anywhere. He might just have to stick it out. And does that mean that he never gets that? He wants that ninth title, doesn't he? So does he ever get there? I mean, I don't know. And it leaves Honda in a tough place. And I do want to talk about them as well. And we've come full circle here. And I think another name I wanted to bring up while we're talking about Honda is Taka Nakagami. Because he's currently by far and away the best Honda rider of the four. He's giving them far more value than anyone else.
Yeah.
And I mean, just by the fact that he just tends to stay on the bike more. But is there a scenario if Mark does move on now with Taka's seat going to someone else for 2 years now and he's just happened to stay in there? Do we see a scenario now where Repsol Honda has Taka Nakagami in it next season?
I think if Mark did leave and Repsol wanted to bring someone up, it would be Rins, would be my pick for them. But so we had this discussion on Twitter the other day, I think it was, where we were saying about some people were talking about Honda and how it's a bad bike. But it's like we both said on there, Taka has stayed on the bike. He's picked up results. He was 8th place, I think, at Assen. So, where is he in the championship? I've got it up here. He's 16th in the championship. Doesn't sound very good. Top Honda's 13th, and that's his teammate Alex Rins. And he's 13 points behind
That's
Rins.
and Rins pretty much got all his points in one race, didn't
Yeah,
he? So.
Rins is a race winner this season. So you look at that and you think, we've had seasons where Taka's been fighting for podiums, but this season when he's fighting for top tens, it's a good result, and it's really weird to say. And because you look, Honda, they
I,
are
I want to see him in orange. I want to see him in orange next year.
There were talks at one point we would see Taka in orange, but I think more likely, I think they'd be looking more at Iagura now for the future because he's the younger rider. He's still linked with the Idemitsu squad. He's still Honda Team Asia. Um, but obviously, I'm biased. I did say he'd win the championship this season in Moto2 before he got injured. But I do think but it's what Honda need to do, and Honda need to now start looking at bringing in fresh blood to MotoGP rather than looking at Joan Mir and Rins who are already there. They need someone who's never ridden a MotoGP bike before, doesn't have any expectations on what it's going to be like, to then get onto their bikes. That's all they've ever known, so they can adapt to it. A bit like how Mark did when he came in.
That's interesting because there's always going to be that school of thought where it's like you need someone who knows what they're doing here. Like, can we trust an inexperienced guy to give us the feedback we need? But that is interesting because theoretically that does make a lot of sense. I think
Well,
where there's no preconceived notions of what it should be like, and you just all you know is that thing.
yeah, you think about Alex Marquez when he came up in the 2020 season, straight into Repsol. A lot of people didn't like that. But actually, in his first year in Honda, he wasn't bad. He got podiums for them and he actually picked up decent results for them. Um, since then, obviously, it's gone different. He's left Honda. But you think about people like that, and I think him and Taka are the last rookies that they brought in, excluding Morbidelli and Luti from that Australia Galizia squad they had a couple of years back, which was no good anyway. But it's just, you look at that and you think, okay, maybe it is time for them to do that again. Take a punt at someone younger, an Iagura, for example. I was going to say Aaron Canet, but I don't know. He crashes a lot anyway himself. So I think someone like Iagura, who's not a known crasher, will just take the finishes, a bit like Taka, could be a good rider to add to their ranks in MotoGP.
Yeah, and I think that is probably if they do lose Mark. I mean, it all depends. Mark is the key to what happens now in this little transfer window period we're getting into, the silly season, as we like to call it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what his decision is, or whatever Honda's decision is with him, is going to trigger a lot of that. And then it's just up to them how they feel like their best approach is going forward. But with with do you think that any of do you think these riders, so you're looking at Mir, Rins, because we've mentioned Taka doing a decent job, Mir, Rins, and Mark, are these guys underperforming? Are Honda getting their money's worth out of these guys? Is this like, we're forking out all this money to get these experienced riders in who are all race winners and world champions in the case of two of them, and Mark, one of the greatest world champions we've seen. At what point do Honda is it in their best interest to go, we need to move at least one of these guys on, at least save a bit of money if we're not going to get the result anyway? What's the point of spending all that money on a rider that, first of all, doesn't finish many races in the sense of, well, in all three of them, and doesn't start many races? So it's like, are you better off just having three rookies that cost you nothing and you're going to get the same results anyway?
I think three rookies would be a stretch. I think at least one next year is the way they should go. And the rider I look at, and I only noticed this because we spoke about it pre-season of who would finish last out of the full-time riders, and I said, I think I said Taka at the time actually, because I thought the Honda would be bad, but it's a different Honda rider. It's Joan Mir who's last out of the full-time riders. He's 26th out of 28 riders who's taken part this season so far, and he's on 5 points, the same amount as Stefan Bradl, Petrucci, and Pirro. And Petrucci only did one race, so that
And,
just
and,
shows.
and Piro doesn't line up too often either, does
Yeah,
he?
Pirro's done Mugello. Maybe was that his only race? I think. Oh,
Yeah,
he's
I
replaced
think so.
Bastianini in America as well.
Right, yeah.
Bradl's been about. Obviously, he's always there replacing Mark or Rins at the moment. But Mia's having an awful time, and it reminds me a little bit. I'm going to go off on a tangent here. I'm sorry about that, but
Go ahead.
it reminds me a little bit of Lorenzo when he made that move in 2019 over to Repsol Honda, and everyone thought, a bit like Joan Mir, everyone thought he's a MotoGP champion. He's going to make it work. He's going to fight Marc for championships. Speaking of Lorenzo, this is. And in the end, Lorenzo was nowhere. I can't remember Lorenzo getting a top 10 on that Honda. He may have done in the
I
wet,
don't
or
think
he
he
may
ever
have,
really did.
yeah, he may have snuck in there in a race I've forgotten about, but I can't remember Lorenzo getting a top 10 on that Honda. He got injured all the time. He crashed all the time. And then you look at Joan Mir, MotoGP world champion for Suzuki. Everyone said he's going to do really well on this Honda. His style is going to suit it. He's a hard breaker. But he's come in, he's crashed a lot, he's got injured a lot. It's the same sort of scenario of, like I said before, of bringing in people who know what a MotoGP bike should be like, and one that should perform should be like. And Mir's probably trying to ride it like the Suzuki that he knew and loved, and he's just crashing his brains out, and he's just getting injured. And again, it leads to him sort of thinking everyone's saying Mark should leave Honda. The Joan Mir should leave Honda as well if you're saying the same about Mark, because it's going worse for him. So I don't know. Honda's just a whole issue in its own sort of. I could talk for half an hour about how Honda are doing because it's just an issue in itself.
Yeah, it is. It is one of those things. I find myself talking about it after every race,
Mm, so do we.
and it is kind of bizarre to see them like this because I mean, obviously in our lifetimes and in like probably our parents' lifetimes, there's never been a time where Honda's been poor in a way like this poor anyway,
Mm,
and even and maybe they should have been a bit poorer earlier when you look at how Lorenzo, like you mentioned Lorenzo on that bike, if Mark wasn't there, would they? But again, I thought Cal Crutchlow used to get good results on that bike as well. So it was never that bad, the bike. It was never that bad. In fact, it was probably still good. Um, and you know, it is honestly the strangest situation I've seen. It's the weirdest MotoGPs. I mean, the what was the period there where it was all like CRT bikes and that? That was
yeah,
a bit weird.
yeah.
We didn't have that many like proper MotoGP bikes out there. That was a bit weird. It's almost a bit weirder now just because the fact that there's like one really strong manufacturer with so many bikes on the grid. Like again, I've not looked this up, but have we ever seen that many bikes from one manufacturer in like a modern GP MotoGP setting? Probably not. So it's a bit strange. Uh, and I don't know about you, but personally, I like to blame Suzuki for a lot of this because I feel like they were on the right track. Of all the Japanese manufacturers, they were on the right track, and they were like, "Fuck it, we're out of here." Um, and they would, I feel like they'd still be up there. You know, they would still be up. They'd be with KTM, sort of throwing their nose in there with Ducati. You know, at most Grand Prix. So I do blame Mr. Suzuki for a lot of the issues with MotoGP at the moment. A lot of the, like big, mostly Ducati, you know, um, finishes where everyone's at the front and blah blah blah.